Hey, so schön, dass du da bist. Ich habe eine kleine Werbung für dich vor diesem Podcast. Vielleicht möchtest du auch anderen helfen, sich glücklicher, freier, leichter zu fühlen. Vielleicht wünschst du dir für dich selber einen intensiven, wunderbaren Weg. Die neue Soul Coach Ausbildung startet im September. Sie ist schon halb ausgebucht, aber noch sind Plätze frei. Du findest alle Informationen unter dem Link in den Shownotes. Schau vorbei, wenn es dich ruft. Ich freue mich auf dich. After a short German introduction, there will be an English interview. Herzlich willkommen zu Radikal Glücklich, deinem Podcast für ein strahlendes, gut gelauntes Leben. Ich bin Silja, Folge 305, hat Interviewgast Octavia F. Raheem zu Gast. Und es geht um Rest is Sacred. Ich freue mich so, ihr Lieben, über das heutige Interview. Es ist eine Frau, die ich auf Instagram gefunden habe oder die mich gefunden hat. Irgendwie ein Post, der zu mir kam, sie ist nicht auf mich zugekommen, aber ich habe einen ihrer Posts gesehen zum Thema Rest, also zum Thema Pausen machen. Und es hat mich berührt. Ich weiß gar nicht mal, welcher das war. Seitdem folge ich ihr und habe dann gesehen, dass sie ein Buch rausgebracht hat. Und ich habe es mir sofort bestellt. Es heißt Rest is Sacred. Und es kam zu Hause an und ich wusste, ich muss sie fragen, ob sie in den Podcast kommt. Es ist schon ihr drittes Buch, das war mir damals gar nicht klar. Sie ist irgendwie eine hochdekorierte Yogalehrerin, insbesondere Yoga Nidra, also das Yoga der Ruhe und des Nach innen Kehrens. Und sie hat sich zum Glück Zeit genommen und Ja gesagt. Und wir haben ein wunderbares Interview aufgenommen, was hervorragende Dinge teilt. Sie erzählt, wie ausgebrannt sie war, bis sie die Heiligkeit und den Segen von Pausen entdeckt hat, von Ruhe entdeckt hat. Sie spricht darüber, wie wir in die Pausen kommen, was einfache kleine Dinge sind. Sie macht es super simpel, man kann es so gut verstehen. Also selbst wenn dein Englisch nicht total sattelfest ist, hörst dir an, ihre Stimme ist auch so, so schön. Und wir sprechen darüber, in welcher Geschwindigkeit wir leben und was es macht, wenn wir langsamer werden. Sie spricht darüber, wie wir unser Dharma finden, was alles für uns sichtbar wird, wenn wir lernen, uns zu entspannen und auszuruhen. Und ja, ich liebe das Interview sehr. Ich hoffe, du hast genauso viel Spaß wie ich. Atme einfach tief durch. Erlaub dir, eine Pause zu machen, vielleicht während du uns zuhörst. Schau dir ihre Webseite an. Sie hat dort kleine Rest Practices, also kleine Übungen, angeleitete Meditationen für das Thema Pausen und Entspannung. Ihre Bücher sind fabelhaft. Ich habe sie in den Shownotes verlinkt. Und ich freue mich einfach sehr, all die schönen Dinge mit dir oder euch zu teilen. Danke fürs Zuhören. Danke fürs Hiersein. Es bedeutet mir viel. Und ich bin gerade sehr glücklich, dass ich solche Gespräche führen darf. Alles Liebe und danke an Octavia. So I'm happy and I feel very blessed to have a special interview guest today. Dear Octavia, I love your book, Rest is Sacred. I will make sure to get the other ones as soon as possible. It touched me deeply and I'm happy to talk with you today about the importance of rest and what it can unlock in us. So thank you for being here. And maybe you would like to introduce yourself, say what you do, because it will always probably be more accurate than when I do it.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here. I love that the words I've written have moved across the ocean and touched you all the way in Germany. My name is Octavia Faith Ann Raheem, and one of my favorite writers and thinkers and poets and philosophers, Sandra Cisneros, says that to say the name is to begin the story. And these days, I say my full name every time I talk about myself because Octavia is my paternal great-great-grandmother. Faith is my paternal grandmother, and Anne is my maternal grandmother. And so to say my name is to not only begin my story, it is to continue their stories. And in the light of the work that I do, which is to hold deep space for people to wake up to their sacredness through rest, um, those women who brought me forward, my grandmothers and my mother, are profound inspirations to the work that I do. So, what do I do in the world? Right. So, I write and um, I share the gift of rest through writing, and I also teach yoga nidra, restorative yoga, meditation, and just teach people how to reconnect to who they are beyond what they can do, beyond what they can produce, beyond what they can perform, and beyond the conditions and situations and labels that have been projected onto them. And if I were going to say that more succinctly, I'd say I'm a rest teacher. I'm a rest coach. And sometimes people go, "Oh, you teach people to sleep." And I'm like, "No, I teach people to wake up," right? Because the rest based practices that I teach um, are practices that really help to, I'll say, clear the mindscape of all the gunk that's on there that keeps us just asleep and disconnected from who and what we actually are. So I'll say that's who I am. I'm also a wife. I'm also a mother. I'm also the daughter to two people who are now in spirit. I'm an auntie, I'm a sister, I'm a friend. Um, and I am someone who has been deeply fatigued, exhausted, weary, and tired and disconnected from my own heart, my own body, and my own being, and found my way back to life through rest.
That is so beautiful. We will have to dive deeper into that. But first of all, your introduction and saying your name really touched me. I'm sometimes sad that I don't have the name of my ancestors in my name. I just have my name. But it was a fashion like that in Germany when I was born. And that was
Mhm.
beautiful to listen to you. I know that we are, of course, connected, but that's a beautiful
Yeah,
way to look at it.
thank you.
So let's maybe start with your own story, which is also in the book, not mainly, but it is in there. But in your own words, it will probably describe it more. I know that a lot of people try to rest more, but it's hard for us because there seems to be something like we are all I have sometimes the feeling we are all chasing something in the outside, which is originally in our inside. So, how did you wake up to the practice of rest? How did that happen?
It's been a slow, intentional, deliberate, and steady journey. And I say it that way because we sometimes we want things to happen instantly and to just get it. and and rest is a practice, not a perfect. And practice means that we get to return to it again and again and again and be students of something. And how I became a student and then ultimately a teacher of rest was I suffered a severe um burnout or breakdown episode that left me hospitalized. And the technical condition I had was rhabdomyolysis, which is something you get from overusage of muscles. And that should tell you all you need to know about how I was living my life. Like I was working too much and working out too much and not eating enough and not hydrating enough. I was a lot of energy out. Like if the arrow of energy was pointed, it was just pointing directly out 100% without a lot coming in, or if anything coming in that could really sustain me. And that all came to head one spring about 13, 14 years ago, when when I landed with this condition called rhabdomyolysis. And the thing is, it was slowly creeping up. I remember this day I had done this really hard workout after working like 14 hours. It's like my schedule was workout at 4:30 a.m., run home, take a shower, leave my house again, go to work. I was at the time a public school teacher, go to work for, I guess the normal work day was 8 hours, but I always had to do more. And I was always doing all the extra things. So that extended my work day. And then I also was building my own kind of business on the side of my regular day job. And so I'd leave that job and go to my next job and be there until about 9, 10 at night, go home, grade papers, fall in bed by midnight, get up, do it all over again. And unfortunately, that sounds a little ridiculous, yet it's a life that many people listening or many people are living and don't know how to get out of that cycle. And I didn't know how to get out of the cycle, and my body did. Like I chuckled there, not because it's funny, because remembering it is uncomfortable that I didn't have the emotional and physical and even spiritual capacity to stop the burnout or the breakdown. And so my body just said, no more. I can't do this anymore. And it showed up in my overworking out. Um, and the thing I remember the most is that I couldn't move my arm. And I was like, huh, what's that? And I tried to push through the pain. And I was like, I'll just go to work today. It'll be better later. And it kept getting worse and it kept getting worse. And then my partner goes, I think that something is really wrong. And I go, it's fine. I'm fine. I'm just going to go to work. I'm worried about my work. And ultimately, I go, you know what? Something's not right. Go to the hospital. And I think I'll just let them check it out. I go to emergency because all these other things that started happening that are too gross for me to share. And I was like, oh, maybe this is I shouldn't just push through it, but I should go get it checked out. My husband goes, "I'll drive you to the hospital." And I go, "I don't wanna bother you. I don't wanna be a burden. I'll drive myself." And then he's like, "No, I'm driving you." And I refuse to accept this help. I refuse to accept this help. Needless to say, I go to the hospital. It's not a small thing, it's a big thing. I end up being in there for about 5 days actually, which was very shocking. During my time in the hospital, though, at the time, I'm already a yoga teacher, but the yoga I'm doing is all fitness based and very power yoga, very go hard or go home yoga. And it wasn't mindful. Not that those forms of yoga can't be mindful. I wasn't mindful in how I engaged them. And so I had all my yoga books in there because I was like, just what am I going to do while I'm in this hospital? And I had this nurse who came in. She's looking around. She's like, you look healthy. You seem like on the outside, you don't look like you should be in here. Cause I was at my most fit, had my most muscles. I had a six-pack ab. Like I just looked like the picture of health on the outside. On the inside, I clearly was not okay. And that nurse just called it. She said, "What is actually going on with you? Why are you working yourself like this? What are you running from?" And then beyond administering the pharmaceutical medicine that was part of her duties, this nurse prayed for me. And what she prayed for me was that she actually spoke the scripture over me, which is Psalms 46:10, be still and know. And I remember just sobbing and I said, I don't know how to be still. I'm afraid of being still. What do you mean be still? If I'm still, who's going to do all this other shit? Excuse my language. I just didn't know how to be still. But what she did now as a teacher, I really understand that sometimes you can be with people and they can share or transmit their peace and compassion to you. And it won't instantly wake you up, but it gives you hope that your circumstance can be different. And what she did for me that moment in praying for me and giving me the medicine, the literal and the spiritual medicine I needed. And then also just saying, like, hey, you might need to slow down, not might, you can. And then she also did something very practical. She was like, "Hey, I'm a nurse. I'm a grandmother. I'm very active in my community." She told me all of the things she did that I was like, how are you resting? How are you being still and doing all of that? And she said, "Octavia, every week I shut everything off and I have a restorative day for myself. And at this point, I'm maybe in my early 30s, and I go, if this person who has a very demanding job of being a nurse, they work 12 to 16-hour shifts sometimes, and has all these different layers to her family and to her faith and to her volunteering and to her outreach, and also holds a lot of responsibility in her family and community. If this person is telling me they have found and made a way to press pause in the week, I can find 10 minutes. I can find 10 minutes to rest, and so there's more to that story. There are layers to the story. And I would like to say that instantly I was like, I'm never going to work myself, to the ground again. I did say I'm never working myself to the point that I'm this physically unwell ever again. It was so painful. And I really didn't know how. Like in a moment, I was like, okay, I believe you. I'm trusting you. Thank you for sharing a story with me about how you find the time and make a way to rest. And it was with that some faith, some hope, and also out of I rose from the ashes of a lot of pain to be like, okay, I have to find a way to rest. And so I knew I couldn't keep doing power yoga. My physical body was like, "Yeah, you can't do that anymore." I knew couldn't keep working out and have my fitness regimen be the way it was, immediately. And so I started going to yin yoga, which is if you know yin yoga, it's like long holds all low to the ground. It looks like you're doing nothing, right? But
It's so
that yin
hard though. It's so hard though.
it's a challenging practice on all the levels, but the real challenge I found was just the way it causes me to meet myself on the inside, to meet myself where I actually am. And in the yin practice, you realize that the only way out is in and then through, right? You can't escape yourself. And so I would say my yin yoga practice was actually my bridge from doing all these things that exhausted me to doing something that might have challenged me internally, yet it was also nourishing. And from there, it was more of a meditation practice, more tolerance for the restorative yoga. And ultimately, I found my way to yoga nidra, which is the most restful and awakening practice I've ever practiced or taught.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you for sharing. Um, when I read your book, first of all, it's like when somebody is a rest teacher, and I'm still unlearning the conditioning of doing too much and being too busy. So that's really inspiring and giving hope to read a book and see that someone is going the same path, but is a little bit in front, maybe. But you share also in one of the first pages that it's also about learning how to feel worthy of rest.
Mm.
And I think that really hits into the heart of a lot of, especially women, if I can say that. For me, the urge to rest more came with perimenopause and menopause.
Mhm.
To see that my body is creating so much heat when I was in stress and doing too much, and really like kind of saying, well, we are not going to let you do this anymore. But it is still, we are kind of, I meet a lot of women and myself too. I think sometimes we are trying to run so hard to get acknowledgments and be seen and everything like that. So maybe you can share a little of your thoughts about that.
Yes. Thank you for sharing a little about yourself it resonates, right? It feels important to name that this individual condition we're naming of exhaustion, of fighting and literally breaking down to prove worthiness is also very much fed by a system, right? That tells us, treats us, has whole laws and cultural practices built into place to attempt to affirm that we are not worthy. And then we internalize that, right? So I also there's definitely a system benefiting off our exhaustion. And we also must be individually and collectively responsible for disrupting that exhaustion, that engine of exhaustion, if you will. And and so I want to name that because sometimes in kind of the I don't know if I want to call it self help or wellness world, it can feel very much like there is something wrong with you. You are just the problem. If you could just figure it out. And if it's so important to acknowledge that there is a lot conspiring to ensure that folks don't feel worthy and think that the way to access that worthiness is beyond themselves, because that's going to keep you purchasing stuff. That's going to keep you buying. That's going to keep you under that person's foot. Um, And so here's an interesting thing. The more when I started doing practices that invited me to slow down and then get still, it is it's in the pause. The pause is such a place of possibility and power. And even just 1 minute of pausing, you get a glimpse of who you are when you're not doing. You can start to see more clearly beyond the cosmic illusions and the systemic ones, who and what you are. And I'm saying that to say that the more we rest, the more we can see ourselves, but then it's hard to even come to a place of, I can rest. And I'm saying that to say, you can rest and start with 1 minute, that 1 minute of pause, right? And so I'll back up. What you said is worthiness. We're trying to prove that we're worthy. This may seem to oversimplify the complexity and weightiness of the challenge. And what I invite even you and the listener to do is just to feel the support beneath you. That's the chair, that's the floor, wherever you are, and to get 1% more comfortable, and then to notice your body, and then to notice your breath. And then in the place where you feel the softest and most tender, which might be the place where you feel a lot of sensation, to just speak into that place and say, I am worthy, right? I am not trying to oversimplify it. I'm like, we have to start somewhere. So maybe you're not going to go lay down because you feel so unworthy of rest. And you maybe grew up in a family that was like, you have to earn your rest, right? What I say now, I'm like, rest is definitely sacred. You are sacred. Rest is also a necessity. So the other thing I invite people to do is like, say to yourself, I am worthy. And my worth doesn't come from outside of me. I am worthy. And then the other thing, if people are like, no, that's not really my style. I'm not into affirmations, or that feels like I'm lying to myself, is just logically speaking, rest is a necessity. It is a necessity. You need to drink water. We need to breathe air. We also, and I'm not even just talking about sleep, I'm talking about a place where we can access fuel, restore, regenerate, exhale. We need that, right? And so it's like one of the two. Start with affirming your own worth from the inside, or go to just the physiological need of, no, I actually need rest. Whoever convinced me that I had to earn it and I wasn't worth it, they were wrong. And then the other thing I will say is when people often ask, well, Octavia, I don't know how to rest. Where do I start with rest? And I always say, well, start with slowing down, right? If you move like this and my hands are waving kind of frantically and really fast, then just slow down by 1% of that, which might almost feel, if I'm looking at you, it might not be perceptible to my eye, but your body and nervous system will register, oh, there's a little bit of slowing down. You don't press the brake immediately when you've been running because that's startling to your system, right? So I always tell people start with slowing down and then move to observing the natural pauses that exist between your breath, between the words you speak, sun up, sun down. Like there's so many naturally occurring pauses all day, every day. And then the third step will be, and then extend the pause. like how I just pause talking, just extend the pause. You're just priming your system to be able to tolerate more rest. And then ultimately, you'll find a rest practice. And it might be napping, it might be meditation, it might be first you do some yin yoga. I advocate for yoga nidra. I think it's one of the most powerful practices, and it feels really accessible. Um, if I could just if s the listener, I just wanna simply say to the listener, "As you are, you're worthy." Like, period. And keep returning to that. Play this over and over, say it over and over to yourself, and then just sit down into that truth. Um And I say that as someone who is really ambitious. I've written 3 books in 3 years. I know there's something profound for me to do here on this earth. I feel like I'm here at this time for a reason and a meaningful reason. Why am I saying all this? Because sometimes people are like, "I got stuff to do. I can't just be laying around." That's not what I'm talking about. I'm also talking about rest as a practice that allows us to start to be more masterful in our discernment of what is ours to do and what is not ours to do. Because so much of what I see exhausting really powerful women is we're doing everybody else's work and we haven't gotten to the sacred work that's actually ours to be doing. Um, there's a lot of distractions. So, I think the question you asked is, we don't feel worthy, and I maybe went too simple in being like, "The thing is, it's just not true." Like, you really were born worthy. I get all the layers of we got a lot of conditioning. I got a lot of conditioning. And rest disrupts that conditioning. And it's if there were this sounds like a, contradiction almost, but if there were a practice that I was gonna tell people to fight for, I'd say, "Fight for your rest." You know? You know? Like and then the other thing, just practically speaking, because sometimes I meet a lot of people who go, "I don't have time to rest." And you might see those very same people on Instagram for 20 minutes. And I'm like, on my website right now, I have rest practices that range from 3 minutes to 26 minutes that are complimentary and you can download them, right? So we get to make different choices, right? Pay attention to how you're using your time and your energy. And is it depleting? Is it nourishing? Or is it agitating? Or like what is actually happening when you engage in certain behaviors over and over? um, that's helpful too, right?
100%. And I totally agree that there's a whole system keeping us exhausted and keeping
Mhm.
us thinking we are lacking of something. So we keep on buying and running and everything. So 100% on that. And plus, I have the feeling that sometimes we run away from rest. That's what I
Mhm.
noticed when I started resting more. I had so many tears come up. And at first, that really frightened me because it was like, I think a whole year I was crying every day. And my life was fine, but there was so much old grief in my cells and my bones that needed to come out and still sometimes does. But it was a long time. It felt easier. It wasn't, but it felt easier to run away from that grief coming up instead of resting, letting it come, and then recognizing it will just flow away and there will be peace beyond it. So maybe you can say something.
Thank you for saying that because that is true. That's what I was doing when I exhausted myself until I ended up in the hospital. It's like I'm just running, I'm running. If I keep doing, if I keep going, if I keep climbing, I don't have to feel. Um, I don't have to face my feelings. And that's really human. And you said, like, it felt easy, but it really wasn't. Well, it kinda was easy to just keep avoiding that. the thing is, it catches up with us some way, somehow.
Yeah.
I teach rest sometimes one to one, far less one to one these days, more in a group or a community. Because that sense of being held not just by the practice, not just by the earth and the floor, but being with a kind of sacred and safe community of people who are also resting, who the person beside you might be crying too, right? Like, it helps you to feel less alone, but also when there's been contraction in the body or the nervous system, and there's even just a little space to let some of that go, that release might show up as tears. It might show up as laughter. It might show up as an automatic sigh that you didn't make happen because the body's really wise and intelligent and it responds to rest. When I'm teaching, especially a restorative yoga class where there's just a lot of support, and if the external eye would just look like we're just laying around on all these pillows and blankets and stuff. But what I always say when I'm teaching that practice is whatever comes up to be released. And sometimes what comes up to be released, people are like, "Okay, Octavia, this feels very turbulent." It is really helpful then when you have, like, someone you really trust there with you as that comes up, and I always tell people, I'm like, "Well, if it's too much what's being released, move slowly, come out of the practice. Otherwise, if you can stay aware, it comes up, it goes away." And then one of my teachers, her name is Dr. Gail Parker, and she retired from being a psychologist, but she has 50 years of experience as a psychologist. She's also a yoga therapist, and she's been a yogi for 60 years, right? So she's always been fusing the 2. And one thing she taught me, and she could probably break down the physiology and what's happening in the nervous system. She said, in rest, when something comes up to be released, it never comes back. Yeah. And she's like, it doesn't mean like, oh, it's over. She's like, that aspect of whatever the thing was, there might be another layer to it, but it doesn't come back into the system. And as an embodied practice, I'm like, oh, I felt that true. And so for me, I'm like, okay, it takes courage to rest, many layers of courage, because what you just said is very true. Sometimes you're like, "Ah, just, why am I crying so much?" And I have to ask you though, like, after you cried, how did you feel?
Always felt lighter. At first, the first weeks when it started, when I engaged in a little like a lay down breath work and then
Mhm.
rested after the breath. So that was my kind of easy
Ooh,
way to do something active.
beautifully,
Rest.
yeah.
That was good. And I cried really hard, like really like something horrible happened, and I was like, and at first that frightened me, and my thoughts about what is wrong with me that I have to cry so hard didn't let me feel that light. But after I thought, well, it's probably normal, whatever I'm releasing, I'm releasing. After that sunk in, I just felt lighter. And
Mm,
after a year or so, of course, still I'm touched sometimes when I rest.
mhm.
I think it's just human to feel
Yes.
the feelings and to see that still in my days I'm numbing sometimes myself. But to see that that also changes, that you can be lighter after a year of releasing and rest.
Yeah, yeah.
And I read that in your book. I read that you also had there was something about sadness and release, and I felt so. I was like, yeah, I feel this.
No, yeah, it's not just you, and part of that is, rest stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the, autonomic nervous system that controls our capacity to digest and process, and digestion is not just a metabolic experience that we have in the body. Everything that we have taken in has to be digested and processed, and when we just keep moving, we keep adding input and stimulus. And then when we slow down, things start to be able to be processed and digest. And what's beautiful about that is what's been nourishing about certain experiences can be assimilated, and what needs to be let go and processed through and released, I'm gonna say, like, as a toxin from your being, can now be released in rest. It's also why sometimes people just start laughing or they go, "I feel so euphoric." And then sometimes people just fall asleep because they're physically tired, right? And so I'm so glad you brought that up, because if people start a rest practice and then they're like, "I'm just crying," they might quit. They might become afraid. You're like, "What is happening?" I'm like, "Well, part of it is like you've been at this heightened state." And sometimes it's just pure relief. You're just like, "I'm so relieved." And then sometimes it's just sometimes we know what's coming up to be processed and digested, and sometimes we just do not know that the nervous system's just having release. Um, I like to pair resting, and I learned this from Tracy Stanley and Dr. Shanti Takarante Perez. Like, after rest practices, it's really important to journal, to journal or free write, even if it's just a minute. And sometimes for people, it's not journaling and free writing, it's drawing that they're gonna do to help just continue the release, the metabolizing, the integration, and the awareness making that can come out of rest. Um, and then to back up a little bit, sometimes we've been going 100 miles per minute. I think y'all use different measurements, but 100 miles per minute, and rest is 0. And sometimes, and so that can be jarring to the system, and that's why we're having some of the emotional things come up. And I offer people, if they're practicing alone, if I were teaching a class, we do some movement first and then we slow down and then we go to stillness, right? Instead of having it be so abrupt, right? Because sometimes it's just the nervous system and the body's not ready to be still and it feels jarring, you know? So what I would say on the front end, do some movements. And I mean, it could be like a brisk walk. It could be walking up and down steps in your house. It could just be like inhale, reach up, exhale, hands down, and then turn that to slow movement and then get still, do your rest practice, and come out and journal and free write. I know that has many steps, but that also can still be something that's 10 to 12 minutes a day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I will, of course, make sure that there's a link to your website and the rest practices.
Yeah, yeah.
Finds it. Since you're mentioning the speed we are sometimes moving in our daily lives, you also have so you're mentioning in your book the natural speed of ours instead of the speed we are used to live in. So would love to hear your thoughts on that for the listeners.
So we all have different speeds, right? Just kind of like we all move with a different kind of rhythm. And I I think what I was talking about in the book is like moving at the speed of life and at the speed of trust,
Yes, the speed of
and
trust. I love that so much.
that moving at the speed of trust, I learned it from a facilitator I've worked and rested with. Her name's Christina. Her last name's escaping me, but she's out at Earthseed in Durham, North Carolina. And I believe she might have been referencing the work of Adrienne Marie Brown when she said moving at the speed of trust. Um, and just if you even think about someone going on a walk with a trusted friend, how are you moving when you're in that space? you know, versus not. And just what the speed of trust really is, as a phrase to me, is an invitation to think about, um, to be aware of the pace you're moving at and to slow it down by 1%. The other thing is moving at the speed of trust for work. What? Moving at the speed of trusting that your life is unfolding in divine timing, Because when we're hurrying, it's just like, I gotta get there. If I don't get there in this way. And I'm not saying be late, right? It's just like, how can we have a different relationship to time that isn't so frenetic and pressurized? Yeah. you know? And I know what it feels like just in my life when I've been moving, like, I'll never get there. And here's the thing, you maybe get there faster if you go faster. You miss a lot of the process along the way. An example is I used to speed to my job um, every day, just always on speed. Got to get there, honking my horn, whatever. And one day I couldn't do that because it was congested, everything slowed down. And I looked to my right and I'm like, beautiful tree. How long has that been there? And then I go, it's a tree. It's been there a very long time. I never noticed the tree because of how it's moving. And then I noticed all these other things around me and I go, oh, I've literally been speeding down the same path for 4 years and never seen any of this stuff. And just arriving at the point, frazzled and barely present once I got there. And then, you know, I can't speed one day. And I have a completely different experience of driving the same route. And so, yeah, someone might prioritize, let me just get there over what's the experience of arriving? And
100%.
maybe it wasn't over 4 years, it was 1 year, like, but my point is that yes. And I would just invite you and the listener to contemplate for yourself, what does moving at a more natural speed, um, and at the speed of trust look and feel like for you? Um And then I have an 8-year-old, and I think about how he moves. Sometimes I'm like, he has no awareness of time. But I just look at how he moves, and I'm like, I'm taking note because I'm like, huh, look at his just kind of organic awareness of like, he's just moving and enjoying his body and enjoying the space. Granted, we're not 8 years old. We have places to be. But I'm like, how can we call in just even fractionally a little bit more of less rushing?
Oh, yeah, that is so true.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing. My youngest is 16,
Mhm.
and he loves when he comes from school. In Germany, we have different school times than you have in the US. When he comes from school, he loves to have a little nap.
I love that.
I know, and I was like, I thought that would stop at some age, but he's like, no, I love my naps. It's so cozy. So he comes home, he eats, he has a nap, and then he does his stuff, sports and homework and whatever. And I'm like, yeah, for this year, it's my 2025 thing to have more naps.
Mm. I love that. I love
Because he's so cozy. And Sam, years ago, I read a sentence, I think it was from Eckhart Tolle, who said that we are just missing, we're missing life if we are always kind of trading this moment for something in the future which isn't real. And then I thought about what you just said about the speed and what did I trade until today. And I traded, like, when my two other now adult sons were small, I went to the university again to study psychology and had a job and had those two kids. I was literally running even through, like, to the train back home. I was running, did a lot of
Mhm.
workout. And I don't know a lot about those years anymore. And it's just so precious years that I wasn't as present as I could have been.
Mm.
That was a hard learning, but it was worth it to understand that nothing is worth it to be traded for. No moment.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes
So
we're trading things that they're sacred. They're not they don't need to be up for trade. And sometimes we learn the hard way.
yeah. So we are almost done with our time. I have a lot of more questions here, but people will just have to read your book. I was really touched also about the theme on and the research you mentioned by Dr. Parker on race-based stress and how healing rest can also be on those topics. And I fear we won't have the time to go back to go deep into that. I want at the end of our talk, I want to go to the end of your book because I read that last night in bed. And there's beautiful closing and opening poems, which I won't read, but at page 127, making sure that I do the English numbers right. You write, they no longer ask, what do you do? They inquire and share, what are you here to heal within your lineage? And then they come a lot of touching questions, which I felt lead us to the core of what we are here to do to uncondition ourselves and or decondition, I don't know what the right word is, and meet the world with our true self. So that was really touching. So maybe you can share, after all those years of teaching rest, what kind of difference do you notice in people when they find when they dare to rest? Let's say in this way.
Mm-hmm. That is, do you know Karen? I think Karen's last name is Brody. She wrote Daring to Rest.
No.
It's amazing. Um, she's a colleague and friend. I'm blanking on lots of last names today. But when you said Daring to Rest, that's her. She wrote a book about it. It's a 40-day program. She also trains people to be Daring to Rest trainers. Um, and I love that you used that word. My word is devoted to rest. Like what happens when you devote yourself to rest. Um, I have seen, so in myself, it was when I became more rested that I unlocked the potential and the power and the capacity to write 3 books in 3 years while being a wife and mother and running my business, right? Like, if I tried to do that with my waking logical brain, I would have been like, "There's no way I can do that." But rest creates space and clarity and discernment. What's mine to do, what's not mine to do, and it kind of caused me to start to prioritize my purpose, my sacred work, dare I say, my dharma and not everybody else's. And then beyond myself, what I see, I'm thinking of a client who was at the very top of her company and organization. You could go no higher. And we start resting together. And this was over the course of about 2.5 years. And she ultimately woke up to that wasn't her path. It was a path that someone else told her, "This looks good. It will be good." It was someone else's definition of success, and she was exhausted. And it's like I could insert any this is a recurring kind of narrative that I coach leaders through, particularly women through, is they're at the top, everything looks good, but it's not all good on the inside. And what rest allows them the sacred and safe space to do is to start admitting some of what doesn't feel good and to get more and more clear on what both they do not want and what they do want. Um, and for me, wanting and desire the deep ones. I'm not talking about like, oh, I want the milkshake or whatever. That matters if that's what you want, but I'm talking about the deeper desires that kinda won't leave us alone. I'm like, those are your North Stars. That is pointing you toward what you're really here for. When you get underneath the stuff and underneath the external definitions of success, and you're like, "But I feel called to do this." So what I see a lot is people start resting. It gets uncomfortable a little bit because it's gonna shake up some stuff, right? In a gentle way, like, rest is just like a gentle uncovering. And back to the client I was talking about, they gracefully exited that that position in that post left the country and live on new shores. And every time I engage with them, they look so free, so much lighter, so much brighter. And it's also freed up to do her true impactful work in the world, that also doesn't require her to sacrifice her health and well being. And so I see that over and over and over again. And I'm sometimes like, I should partner with a researcher or someone to start to really understand what is happening. Why do people who devote themselves, and I'm not talking about they do nothing, they just lay around. I'm talking about people who devote themselves to rest, particularly through the modalities of yoga nidra and restorative yoga. There's this awakening to the deeper why am I here that that occurs, and that awareness leads the practitioner to make choices in alignment with what is revealed to them in rest. And so you were looking at page 127, and I thought maybe I would just read it aloud since you started to read it so beautifully. And I feel like it's a good line of inquiry for all of us to hear and consider. And the third section of Rest is Sacred was, I call it Rest is Revelation, meaning rest is a portal to great revealings, to uncoverings, and it's a portal to imagination, which imagination is one of the most underutilized resources for adults, right? We just kind of throw imagination by the wayside. And from my vantage point, the world that we now find ourselves in has a lot of nightmarish things happening. And we need to be able to imagine and dream a new world to actually create something new. Otherwise, we're just recycling all the madness. Rest also reconnects us to revelation and imagination in that capacity. So I titled the third part of the book Rest is Revelation because I want to invite adults back into the space of imagination, of daydreaming, because I actually think dreaming new dreams means that then we have a new vision for the world we want to create, and we can get on about the sacred work of doing that. So this almost last page of the book says, is my vision into the future. They no longer ask, what do you do? They inquire and share. What are you here to heal within your lineage? What are you here to rest or relieve within your lineage? What does your work allow you to heal within you? What does your work heal in the world? What part of you is allowed to rest or access relief through your work? What does your rest heal within you, the world?
Mm.
And so the future is out there. It is also right here in me and you being together and lifting up those inquiries is a portal to a world where the questions we are asking people go back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, to even in the line of questioning, what does your rest heal in the world is very different from, well, what do you do? And so if someone says, what is your rest heal in the world? They're also saying, hey, you're valuable beyond the stuff you do. Um, so thank you so much. I'm so glad we got to be here and share space together. And I hope it serves you and your community really well. And I hope we start to ask one another new questions around our being, not just simply our doing in the world, and that we can remember that as we are worthy. As we are sacred. And that also means that we can rest because rest is sacred.
That was beautiful. Thank you for this perfect end of this beautiful interview. Thank you for taking the time for your beautiful books. And I to every listener, just make sure to visit Octavia's website. I will put in a link to a German bookstore, but of course you can grab it everywhere you want to grab it. Grab those wonderful books, and thanks for listening, and have a
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time. It was great.